Hello and welcome to Groovecast, the podcast for the rhythm section. I'm Ashley Walker,
And I'm Charlie Smith.
and today we're going to be talking about something that has been brought up a couple of times to us when we're starting the podcast, and by our friends over in the States at the Bearded Drums podcast. Charlie's friends, I should say.
Yeah, big
mates.
little shout out there to Stephen and Jarrett, who are fantastic podcasters and far better than us.
Yeah, and got much better beards than us as well, which is
Yeah, I see you're trying.
yeah. My razor's broke as well.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And we're going to be talking a bit about the industry and primarily mine and Charlie's sort of paths through the industry, because we know there are a lot of similarities in what we've gone through and in the routes that we've gone through, and also differences. And if there are any lessons to be learnt there, that'll be a bonus. And even if it's what not to do.
This is very true. And yeah, it's complete coincidence really that we've kind of had such a similar way through things and a similar entry to the industry. But it was kind of only when we were first kind of getting to know each other we realised how similar things had been.
Yeah.
Up until that point where our wires had crossed.
Yeah. And I know we both sort of started quite similarly in youth orchestras, and we're both still reaping the rewards, I suppose, of that. And I know for you joined at a sort of similar age as I did to your first youth orchestra, and I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in brief, the first thing of that type that I joined was the school band. You know, when I was 11 years old, just moved to secondary school. First thing you do is join the school band, and ironically, I joined on trumpet because there was no drumming space free at that particular point. So I joined on trumpet, which I'd been playing I think at that point for 2 years, and was still coming to the terms that the fact that I was terrible at playing trumpet and I shouldn't have been allowed to touch one. But through doing that and joining the school band, and then I later, after a year on trumpet in the school band, they finally saw sense and let me play drums. But through the trumpet teacher I had then, who was working for Tees Valley Music Service, he recommended that I should join the Tees Valley Junior Wind Band. Which, although I was a trumpet student, for better or worse, I ended up joining on drums. And I was probably in that band 6 months or a year before they decided it was time for me to graduate that junior band and move up to the senior wind band, with where harder tunes, more elite kind of higher level players. So I did that for a little while, and then I was basically, I think the Tees Valley Big Band was starting to look for another drummer for whatever reason. I think, with people moving away to university or whatever, and so I was introduced to Bill Watson, who I know is a friend of your dad's, and I think my granddad had a conversation with him about, when he was saying he needed a drummer for the big band, and my name came up. And so Bill came down to one of the senior wind band rehearsals, which happened just before the big band rehearsals I think on a Monday evening or whatever. Bill came down, saw me play, had a quick chat, and I basically got the chair. So I ended up graduating within a couple of months of joining the senior wind band. I was leaving it and joining the Tees Valley Big Band, Tees Valley Youth Big Band instead. And for me, that was kind of a better place, because I was much happier, and I much preferred playing the swing stuff and the jazz stuff and the Latin stuff to doing maybe more so what I'd done in the wind bands of the brass interpretations for woodwind and brass of Pirates of the Caribbean or whatever it may be. So it was, for me, it was the better place to be, and I think I ended up staying in that band for a good 5 or so years.
Mm.
So that was kind of my journey, windy as it was to get there. So how about you joining the youth band that you ended up in?
Yeah, for me it was quite early on in me learning to play bass guitar, because I know obviously with your granddad being a drummer and you'd been playing since as early as you could walk, really, couldn't you? Um, and for me, I think I started playing bass when I was about 11, 12ish, and then a year later I auditioned to join the Boston Youth Jazz Orchestra, um, which was just a huge step up, and I know something we're going to be talking quite a bit about in this episode, of taking the leaps and the next step in your career, and learning how to play. And to be honest with you, I probably wasn't even good enough, certainly not on my audition, to be in the orchestra. I was not very good as a reader, and nervous as anything. But like you say, it was at the time I joined the Boston Youth Jazz Orchestra, and then a couple of the other orchestras that were attached, and groups, like the pop choir that they had, which I absolutely loved, doing like a Jackson's medley 1 minute, and then something from a musical. It was just very eclectic. And then the wind band as well, which very similarly to you, doing arrangements of like Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, and which I really enjoyed actually, and Funky Town the next minute, and totally different things with By Joe, which sort of became more of a performance kind of orchestra, and were quite well known locally as that, and putting on a very good show, and playing electric bass with that, and then playing in a wind band, playing upright bass to Funky Town, or it was totally different experiences. And I know it was similar to you in that, going from just doing one-on-one lessons with a teacher, and perhaps playing some of the same pieces for weeks in a row, and learning how to do you learnt your reading in your lessons, but you learnt how to play maybe in the orchestra, and how to play in a rhythm section, and dynamics and tempo markings. You actually realised they actually mattered. And certainly for me, playing with singers for the first time, and in Baijo there were always 4 or 5 singers, and sometimes they would all sing at one time, and realising that as a bass player you have your place. It's not all about the bass, to quote a song. And certainly a lot of lessons there that I'm still using now, and I know it's the same for you in some of the lessons that you still think about now.
Yeah, and I owe doing the Tees Valley Big Band for every single reading job that I've done since, because there's so much of learning to read music that you can do in the classroom, if you like, in with a one-on-one lesson, or with a teacher, to get your theory up to that point. But it's only when you start looking at some parts to play with a band, and start really having to do things quickly, that for me at least, I really learned how to sight read, how to read into a part. So not just seeing it at face value, and knowing how to interpret it, how to look at what you need to play, what you don't need to play, what information it's giving you, what it might not be. And certainly with brass, with big band parts, there's quite often figures written above the lines that you've got to be aware of. Not all of them to play them, but some to play, some to set up, some to work around. And it kind of, and like you say, although it wasn't for me working with a singer, you got to learn how to work with soloists, and soloists would want, you've got to kind of keep them right, but also adapt to what they're doing in a way. So if you're playing a swing figure, and they do come up with play some recurring motif, that you could maybe go with it, or you can counterpoint it. And you kind of, it was learning not only how to play with a soloist, but as you say, absolutely learning how to play in a rhythm section, which for that big band would have been drums, piano, and bass. And sometimes it was upright bass, sometimes it was electric bass. So you got used to working with both, and as a drummer, it was a really, really good education in learning by doing, and making your mistakes in the practice room and making your mistakes then so that you didn't make them later.
Yeah, it's a term that I keep thinking of, and I think I may say a few more times during this episode. A term that people in other industries often they often do this, and it's kind of different for a musician serving your apprenticeship. And as a musician, it's not like being an accountant and going into an office or whatever. It's you almost serve your apprenticeship on without realizing it, if you like. And I know it would have been for us possibly in those orchestras and in the early gigs that we would have done, and the things that you didn't appreciate the value of them then, but you certainly do now. And for me, it was learning that you actually don't need to be perfect, or you don't need to be playing the part perfect all the time. And even if you're just getting by for the first bit of it. And certainly sight reading was something that I owe a lot to that orchestra, the skills that I have now to that orchestra, because I hadn't done any of that really going into it. And I was very fortunate that in the time that I was a member of that orchestra, sort of the different stages that they went through, and from transitioning from sort of a traditional jazz orchestra to maybe perhaps a little bit more of a show band at times, and being more of a performer than as much a performer as a bass player, and not looking miserable and smiling. And even though I was having a great time, but I didn't have maybe the confidence that I did when I left, and I owe a lot to them for that. And then I think towards the end of being in the orchestra, they then gave me the opportunity to be playing upright bass as well, which again I owe so much to, and learning how to solo on the upright bass, which I had no experience in whatsoever. And I know we both have, again, the similarities. We both played in the Music for Youth competitions as well, although I now understand that you didn't play in the competition side, but you were in the performance and the show, weren't you?
Yeah, so we did. We were more on the other side of being just a performing act rather than a competitor, which was fine with me. And it was just the way that it was worked for us, and it was great. We had I think it was just 1 year I did it. The band did it, I think, most years, but I was tied up sometimes. But the year I did it, we went down and did it. Played, I think it was in a marquee or something outside Birmingham Symphony Hall, which was a joy to in of itself, having seen that venue a few times before and on film and all of that kind of thing. So playing there was just being able to go and see it, somewhere that that you'd heard about or seen on television but never been to. That was kind of a nice interesting thing, and it was good to go and do and play. I think we did a 20-minute or half an hour spot in the afternoon after the main competition had, while the judges were deciding their sorting their marks out and all of that, and we were just the kind of I feel bad saying it, but the musical wallpaper, if you know what I mean. So we were there for for people to stop and look and then have a wander, while they were wandering around, or just to casually listen to, which was good. And we did, I think it was the usual mix of a few swings, a couple of Latins, maybe a ballad, but it was good, and it was a nice experience and a good day out. But I mean, for you, I think you were much more involved in Music for Youth in what you did, and maybe you would like to elaborate on some of the places it took you.
Yeah, you actually do remind me now when you said, because I know you played in the marquee outside, and I think the first year that I joined by Joe, we took part in the competition side of it, but also I think I do remember in the afternoon before we played in a sort of marquee thing, and we did like a 15-minute set, and I don't think it was outside the symphony hall. I think it was a different. It might have been by the town hall or somewhere, because we took part in a kind of different side of it to you. But yeah, I remember when I first joined the orchestra, and part of the reason, part of sort of helping me realize that I wanted to be a musician was seeing Baijo for the first time at the Albert Hall. Before I joined, they'd got through to that stage of the competition, and watching them there, and then a year later being able to do it myself with a whole different group of players. And I know you said there, talking with the Symphony Hall, watching sort of videos and of your favourite players there, and it was the same for me at the Royal Albert Hall, and realising that I'm stood where Paul McCartney played, or where Mark Knopfler played. We saw Mark Knopfler, and thinking, oh, I'm stood right where his bass player was. And I think, as I know that you've had experiences in your career since having done your theatre shows where you've been playing and realised, oh, this is wherever some of your heroes have been. And I don't think, whatever level of player you get to, I don't think you ever lose that feeling of like wonder and magic. And it was like that the 3 times that we were fortunate enough to play at the Albert Hall through Music for Youth. It was the same every time for me, and I know for you, you've had some wonderful experiences with that as well.
Yeah, playing in venues that you kind of always looked up to, or that you've seen players doing it. It's always kind of a special experience. I mean, for me, it really hit when I played the City Hall in Newcastle. And I still remember being took as a 5 or 6 year old to watch Tony Christie there when my granddad was in his band, which was after the whole Amarillo Peter Kay revival thing, and I went and saw Tony there, and it's one of those things that even though I was so young, I've still got a memory of it. And then for 15 years later or whatever, to be stood on that stage with my granddad, 10 feet away from me, it was a really nice and really special kind of moment. And it's just the sort of thing that you don't ever expect to feel, but then it kind of hits you, and you do, not so much sentimental about it, but just it's kind of cool. You think it's kind of a nice moment to be taking in, and yeah, and it's definitely something that I wouldn't be taking for granted at all. So it's a great moment and a really nice way to do it.
Yeah. And I know you just touched there on your granddad. Obviously, we've spoken about my dad and your granddad being a musician, and again, you can't really talk about our sort of paths as musicians without mentioning the fact that and the influence that they had on us. And I know it's something that we've both talked about quite a lot, and what goes with having musical family members, and the pressures and also the bonuses of having them. And I wondered for you, sort of how you deal with it, and what you think about in regard to that.
Yeah, so it's always, for me, it's been thinking about it as it's pressure, but in a good way. So there's always, when people know that you're related to a musician who is known among the industry, say, you have. I think people have certain expectations of you, so they expect that you're going to be of a certain standard, and that you're going to do a job, to a really high standard. And you've got to kind of, for me, I've always just, it's been something that I've always wanted to try and match as best I can. So it's less of a bad pressure, but more of a drive to put the time in the practice room, or to work on something, or work on just the general things that you need as a musician, that mean that when I turn up to those gigs, I can go and do it with confidence and not have to think too much about the heritage side of it, which is always there, and it's very, very prevalent. And especially if I'm depping for my granddad, if I'm going and doing some of his gigs, as I have done with the theatre show, it's a real pressure, because they expect, the people I'm working with expect a level of quality, and they expect things to go well, and for whatever it is to be for the job to be done to that standard. So I've got to match that expectation if I want to work again. And it always comes down to reputation, which for musicians is what a lot of careers are based on. It's reputation more than anything else, as we'll touch on later. But so for me, it's like when you're a musician, your reputation's always on the line when you're working.
Yeah.
But I think for when I'm working, especially when I'm depping for my granddad, and it's not only my reputation that's on the line, but his as well. And that pressure is felt a lot more than anything else. And I know that, you know, in the past, there's, you know, it's one of those things that some acts or some artists who you may work with would be, you know, can see things in the wrong way and think that you're just being put in for a job because you're related or because your family or whatever. And I always like the way my granddad's dealt with that, and he's in some cases he's not even mentioned the fact of it to whoever he's put me as a dep-in for. He's just said Charlie's going to do the gig. Hasn't mentioned the fact that I'm related to him at all, because he says at the end of the day, for the most part, they don't need to know, you know, and it just takes away that feeling of doubt in their mind that he's putting someone substandard in just because they're family.
Yeah.
And it's always, and he's always maintained to me, he says he would never have put me in for a gig that he didn't think I could do well, and that he didn't think that I was capable of. And that's always a reassuring thing, you know, even if I'm worried about a certain thing, and you know, always in the back of my mind, I have that thought that he wouldn't put me in for anything that would be a step too far or too far out of my comfort zone. So I'd be interested to kind of hear how you felt that, either in a similar way or in a slightly different way, working with or for or at the recommendation of your dad.
Well, it's like you said there. I remember you mentioning that before, that your granddad has put you in without saying that you're a relative or anything. And it's something that my dad says all the time when I've done gigs either with him or for him or whatever, is that he never, because my dad sometimes obviously has to MD. I've done things where he's been the MD, and so he's obviously he doesn't want to have to be thinking about, oh, is Ashley going to be okay on this or whatever. You know, he's got to conduct something, or and he always says, like, I never think about you as being my son on the gig, or I never think, oh, this is a bit, I know there's a hard bar coming up here or whatever. I'm just another member of the band, and it's not like giving me an extra hand because I'm his son. And I know for me, slightly differently, but going into my dad's swing band and sometimes deputising there, and obviously it's different with your granddad and you playing the same instrument, and whereas and also with my dad being the leader of the band, it can easily be seen as, oh, the bass player can't do it, oh, I'll get my son in, that'll be great. And so I was always reminded, you know, you have to earn your place, and you've got to do your practice and come in and not only be as good as the person before or as you know, as everybody else in the band, but you've got to be better than that and be ready for anything that I'm going to throw your way. And it's something, like we say there, those are sort of the pressures that go with it, but they're also the things that drive you on, and you never let it go to your head and you never think about it. And then you know, once you get past all that, there's just the wonderful thing of playing with your family and something that's very unique, and you don't get a lot of, and it's just a wonderful experience then. And I know also there's sort of two ways, because I know people that have parents or family members that are musicians that have family members that are also in the industry, and they don't like the thing of being related to, you know, a musician, or having that thing hanging over them of, you know, for me being Steve's son, or being, you know, Paul's grandson or Smithy's grandson, or but it's never been a problem for me. And also it's the lesson of not being too proud or not being too stubborn to take advice and help when you need it. And you'd like to think that you'd never get work directly because of the relation, because at the end of the day you have to be good enough. And like you say there, your granddad would never put you in for anything that he didn't think you could do. And it's the same for my dad. And as much as, even though it's never been the case for us of favoritism, it's just been because they think we're the best people to put in. And for your granddad, you're the best depth that he could put in for it, because he knows you're going to do a good job. It would only go so far, even if it was favoritism, because you'd turn up at the gig and they'd realise that, oh, he can't read, so we'll make sure he... And for me, if I turned up at a swing band or a gig with my dad and I couldn't play, it wouldn't last very long, because they'd have to get somebody else in. So
yeah. And I guess with your dad, it kind of goes back to his dad as well. With in the kind of the musical family tree that you come down through.
Yeah.
The way that your dad's been with you, I would imagine, be the way that his dad was with him, because your granddad, of course, was a band leader as well.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And it's that there's a lot of lessons that I do take, not only just about being a musician from my dad, but being the son of a musician. And for my dad, it was always that saying of it's not what you know, it's who you know. And for my dad, being from Middlesbrough and from the northeast like you, there were a lot of connections that he could get because of his dad, and because his own dad was known as a band leader. They'd know, if they needed a dep for something, a trumpet player or somebody to be in some band, they'd think, oh, Arnie's son plays the trumpet. And my dad would never have been too proud to get a gig because of that, because he'd know that he would turn up and do the gig, and quickly... You do these things, and quickly you then aren't known as Arnie's son or Steve's son or Paul's grandson. You're just known as Charlie,
musician.
Another drummer, another bass player, and those are certainly lessons that I know we've both, taken and thought about in our careers.
Yeah, and I guess something that kind of goes back through all of this, and I think it all goes, for me at least, back to doing the big band stuff. And what came after, what came about because of that, was that we learned, even though we were so young in those situations, we learned how to be professionals.
Yeah.
Not only on stage, but how to conduct yourself off stage, how to speak with other musicians, and not kind of look like you were substandard in that by having the head on your shoulders, that you know what you're doing, you know your place and where you want to be. And I think for me, I definitely learned that doing the big band thing. That kind of was the first, if you like, of a of a near professional level gig that I was doing. And you had to, whenever we did things like the Great North Jazz and Big Band Festival, that was, although we didn't realise it at the time, that was a huge networking event, and you were always trying to, meeting with other players, or if you just watched their set, and networking kind of only later became as big a thing as it kind of has been in both of our, at least in my life. But it was kind of the subconscious networking back then, and there's players that I met there that I still am in contact with, or have ended up working with much further down the line.
Yeah, it's like that thing of being a musician, the sort of factors that you have to be able to be a professional musician. And sometimes when the people that you do play with in these youth orchestras, the ones that perhaps would like to be musicians but then never, pursue it or whatever, it's like having the mentality as much as the ability. And just there talking about networking, that's certainly lessons in networking that we would have got from our parents, grandparents and back to that thing again, as I said I would mention again, serving your apprenticeship is doing those gigs that you perhaps wouldn't like to do, or you might have a bit of a negative attitude, especially being a young person, and you might be a bit moody about it or whatever, but it's that back to that thing again of you're not gonna, that you might do a gig that you don't think's very good, and it's probably not going to lead to anything. But you know for a fact, if you're sat on your sofa that night, it definitely isn't going to lead to anything. And you have to take the bad gigs with the good gigs, and certainly doing the orchestras, and not to go back on ourselves, but I know for me, sort of the gigs that I got then because of being in the orchestras, and even though, of course, you're not going to get paid at that age, but it does eventually lead to work later on. And for me, it was getting then recommended by the leader of that orchestra to do some of the local school shows in Boston. There are a few schools there that would do school shows, and then it was a totally different set of skills to then be following a band leader all the time. And as we both know, in some of these shows, and like even the Amdram things, but all the parts, like the funny time signatures and tempo changes and dynamics, it's a whole different experience. And those are the things that I managed to get off the back of that, and then they led to other things as well. And I know that you obviously got things off of the back of your orchestras as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I got doing the youth big band ended up getting me deputising with a local big band that the band leader of the youth big band played in, and that band was a band based in Hartlepool called Musicians Unlimited, led by Lisa Stansfield, sax player Mick Donnelly, who's done many other things beside that. But and I ended up depping on and off for a year for them before I moved away to London to music college. But that was a good year of doing those gigs, and even though it was just a rehearsal, there was no money in it. It was still worthwhile doing for the keeping your eye in with the reading side of it and looking at different parts, but also being able to meet up with these other musicians who were all of that same standard, who were doing some of them are out gigging on their own, or with their own little setups that you could end up coming to do other gigs with later down the line. So there's definitely been players in those big bands that I've ended up working with outside of that, maybe in a small jazz ensemble later on, or doing a different gig, or doing theatre stuff, or whatever it may be. So it's kind of in that way, it's really paid its dues, and you get your name about a little bit, that and people kind of get to know who you are and what you do, and if they're after that kind of thing for something, they might give you a call. And so being in that right place, and being the right person, and being able to not go in there and be arrogant, or be just being the right person, and being good to be around makes a huge difference, irrespective of how your playing is. Quite often, people remember the person much more than they do the playing.
Yeah, it's being easy to work with, isn't it? And I always like to think, as long as I come away from a gig and they think, if nothing else, he was a nice person, or like Ashley, he's nice, or he was all right.
Yeah, that makes the difference.
It goes back to that mentality thing again as well, doesn't it? And just having the mentality, and being as easy to work with as possible, even if what you're maybe at times having to work with isn't what you'd prefer, but you just get on with it and you do your job. And so it's sort of to lead on to something that I know we're going to touch on in a little while, but just there talking about, because I know the differences that perhaps we have between ourselves and our paths is the sort of educational side of it, and the systems that we then went on. I know you obviously went to music college, whereas I didn't take that path, but it's something that I think about quite a lot, and I guess not an anecdote, but something I always think about is that at the time when I joined that orchestra, the Boston Youth Jazz Orchestra, and at that similar point, I left school and left education to be homeschooled, and was often told, of the opportunities that you'll miss out on, and I know that we'll touch on that in a little bit. But for me, leaving school and the school that I went to would do a showcase every year, and they'd usually get a student band to play for it, which was a wonderful experience. To look, almost like backing acts, and something that I've now started to do in the professional world. So a wonderful experience, and leaving the school and sort of being told that you won't be given those opportunities, and then I think less than a month after leaving school, being asked by the head of music if I would come back to be the bass player for the showcase, and also that I would get paid because I wasn't a student, so it wasn't student experience or anything, or work experience. It was, they were asking me to go back sort of professionally, and I think I opened my first bank account with that or something. So, and almost a very nice little segue into sort of the differences between our own paths, and like I say, you went to music college and some of the opportunities that you got with that, and also something that we both want to sort of talk about is that music college isn't necessarily the only option anymore, as it perhaps would have been for our parents, or it was like the done thing then, and there are other ways to go about it now, aren't there?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, the whole thing with music college primarily was that it was the way to cement what I was wanting to do as a career, and having a degree was always something I could fall back on if I ever decided I wanted to go into like say a classroom teaching or lecturing job. Yeah. That was the main reason. On an educational side, the main reason on a life side of it was that it would give me the opportunity to move away from home for a couple of years, and in that case, I got to do what many musicians would dream of, and I moved to London for 2.5 to 3 years. Obviously, slightly shortened due to pandemic and all of that, but I still got the first 2 years of my studies pretty much were relatively unimpacted by what came later. But it was for the experience side of it, it was the best thing I could have done, was to get out of the comforts of home and working with musicians who I knew and who knew me, and getting into a totally different world where everyone was new and everyone was kind of out to impress, not in necessarily in a playing sense, but the people who you were on the course with, who you wanted to work with or learn from or whatever. You got that, and for the networking side of it, music college was great. You met lots and lots of players. You got to meet with some major players in the industry. So I got to to watch a masterclass with Ralph Roll, who of course plays drums with Nile Rodgers and in Chic, and that was a really fascinating time. And also meeting a musical director called Kojo Samuel, who is Stormzy's MD and does all of the big production shows and things, and works with lots and lots of major artists. And getting to hear from the likes of those, as well as all of the great tutors that I was able to study with, was a real benefit of it. The educational side, I didn't really wasn't as important, if you like, to me. I could do it, and I got good marks for what I did, but I was more there for the people than I was necessarily for the course. Although the course was, of course, what I was doing while I was there. It was I used all of what I did on that course as an opportunity to, whether it was getting in touch with players or getting to study certain ideas with certain people. So for me, it was like working with a jazz drummer called Neil Bullock over the past year or so, who was one of my tutors at the ACM where I went in London. Was great, and I took so much from Neil in how he plays and just his approach to the drum kit, and especially playing brushes, which was one of the main things that I really wanted to use my time with a tutor like that to take away, and getting to have all of these tutors at my disposal for 3 years was really key. And I know that maybe, you know, I know students who maybe didn't take as much from that as they could have done, and I certainly don't regret taking as much as I can from everyone who was there, because that was what I was there to do. I wanted to learn as much as possible and get out of uni with not only that piece of paper with my degree on it, a very expensive piece of paper with my degree on it, but also to have not only the connections but also the skills and everything really, really tightened up, that meant I could go in the industry with a confidence almost that I can do it on my own, and that I can make a career out of it. But having said that, and I know this is something you're going to elaborate on now for us, you don't necessarily need to go to music college to get time with really, really good tutors.
Yeah, and yeah, like you say, I mean, for me, music college, I can't say too much about it, and I don't want to, because people can make their own opinions on it as they do already, and I can't talk about experience of being to music college because I haven't done it. I can only speak on what other people have told me about it, obviously. But yeah, like you say there, I think that is the experience of the tutors and everything are the things that are what you'll really, from what I understand, are what are really have all the worth and everything. Yeah. But for me and for people who, they are worried about, they don't necessarily want to go to music college, but they're worried about losing out on those things. Those opportunities are out there everywhere, and you just have to keep your eyes open and keep looking out and listening. And for me, one of the best things that I have done, sort of tutor wise, and was a base course with, I think it was the Pete Roth Academy, and something that I just out of the blue, I can't remember how I saw it, but I think it was advertised on Facebook or somewhere on a social media thing, and it was a 3-day course with Simon Goulding, who we both know, and Lawrence Cottle, one of the greats, and I will apologise because I forget the name of the other bass player, but he was from a totally different. It was very versatile because you obviously have Lawrence Cottle, who's played on everything and with everyone and just a god. Simon Goulding, who's just equally brilliant, and he was there doing more of the Latin and the stuff that he's passionate about, which was fantastic. And then the other bass player was from more of a heavy metal sort of rock world and talking about pedals and sounds and everything, which is something that I know relatively little about, so it was very worthwhile. But what I mean is that those opportunities and the lessons and all that, they are out there, and they're available to everybody, and whether you go to music college or not. And I mean, I just know musicians who have been to music college, and the thing that they have said to me is that when I've said that I didn't want to go or wasn't planning on going, was that they went and then did 3 years at Leeds College of Music or ACM or the Royal Northern, and then after 3 years they were just in the queue with everybody else, waiting to get gigs, which I think is one of the main sort of things that you do need to consider. But it's not something that I would knock. I'm not knocking it.
That definitely comes down to a mentality thing as well, and it goes back to that. It's that there's so many people who go to music college and expect that when they leave with a degree, people are just going to start phoning them for gigs, which of course you and I know isn't the case. And it's one thing that I very much took into my own hands while I was at music college, is that why, just because I'm at music college, does it mean that I'm not able to be a working professional? Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. So within a couple of months of starting music college, I was starting on the islands in the stream show, and I was teaching privately, and I was doing other gigs and things outside of uni, and that was what meant that when I left, I already had a stable career to just continue on with, and it didn't feel like so much of a transition as just everything stopping dead and having nothing to do. So it's totally a mentality thing that if people are leaving music college and expecting gigs just to fall into their hands, it's very much like a disillusion that's the way that the industry works, because it really just isn't. And if you're not willing to put the work in, the footwork in while you're at uni, you're going to have it all to do when you leave there. And I think that's something that definitely I was lucky that I worked that one out quite quickly, and I knew that there was no shortcut. And I think for yourself as well, having not gone to music college, you knew that anyway, and that you just went straight into that with that mindset of learning, serving your apprenticeship still, because really as musicians I think we never stop serving our apprenticeship. We're always picking new things up or learning from whoever we're working for or whoever we're working with. But you've got to, it's probably safe to say that you've learned as much in spending 3 years working, in doing 3 years in a working environment, as anyone who's gone and done 3 years in a music college, if not more, because you'll have taken more about maybe the business side of it or the finances side of it that they just don't seem to teach in a lot of music schools. It's not something that's covered as much as it maybe should be.
Yeah, and certainly working with artists and backing acts and all that kind of thing that you can't be taught in a classroom or in a hall or whatever. And that goes back to us again joining orchestras and taking the steps that you take in a career, and starting off in a classroom or in a one-on-one lesson, then joining your first bands and orchestras, learning how to make mistakes and that it can be okay, and playing with other players, and and it's certainly it's just something that isn't people who think that you have to do music college. There are other options, and if you want to do it as well, keep your eyes out and look out for the courses and stuff, online things, and
and one of the things that I think has caught both of our attentions of late that I think deserves a mention on this little podcast of ours is the elite music camps that our friend John Thurkel has been putting together with such players as Snake Davis and
Paul Turner,
of course, and I think Rob Harris as well, the guitarist. And for any musician, whether you've been to music college, not music college, whether you're been in the game for a while or whatever, they're so worth looking at, because you can guarantee that you could go on any of those and still come away with some massive value for it, no matter how long you've been in the business or how experienced you are, because it just it caters for everyone. And if you haven't checked out elite music camps, I highly recommend that you do, because their week-long masterclasses and workshops are really I think the way that the education industry could move forward, and it's giving a musical education in a completely different way to any formal conservatoire or music college ever could.
Yeah, even if it's just exchanging stories or experiences, all of that is of value, isn't it? Really,
completely. And it's a different way of progressing through the business, and one which I think is definitely going to keep building as time goes on.
Well, I think we're about at the end of our little convo here.
You could be right.
So I hope we hope you've enjoyed listening or watching on YouTube. And Charlie, you can tell us where you can tag us if anybody has any questions or all that usual stuff.
Yeah, as always, you're always welcome to get in touch with us here at Groovecast, and you can find all of the social medias on Facebook and Instagram at Groovecast UK.
Yeah, and make sure as well to check out Charlie's website, because you can see updates on us there, as well as Charlie's own blogs and wonderful things.
all of that good stuff. And of course, check out Ashley Walker on Spotify to hear all of the tunes off of his forthcoming album, which will be out at some point soon.
Hey, thanks for that, pal.
Anytime.
Alright, well, we'll see you next time on Groovecast.
We certainly will. Thank you very much for listening or watching, and we shall see you then.